Good evening and welcome to Raise the Bar. I am your host, Troy Haynes. This is the Sky High and Fly Jump Camps podcast. And this is a first for me this evening. Tonight, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is high jump, obviously. Those of you that are new to the program, I was a UCLA high jumper long before most of you were born, most likely. I graduated off the track team at UCLA in 1986. So yeah, that was, we're getting close to 40 years ago. I jumped 2 meters 22 when I was in college, which was a respectable 7.3 and a quarter or a half, depending on how you look at it. And it was enough to get me to the NC2A finals my senior year, where I placed ninth. Typical with a lot of my best results, I was one spot from being an All-American, and never quite made it to any big traveling squads or dual meet teams or anything that was around at that time. And I never jumped any higher after I left college, even though I did continue to train. Had some consistency and stuff like that, but never ever got over 7.3 again. I think best I ever did after that was 2.5. But anyway, I digress. Talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is of course me. But we are here today embarking on a new episode and track in Raise the Bar, which is just a private podcast. I was listening to Colin Coward on the way home today on a podcast, and usually as guests, but every once in a while I just go on a quick rant. So I wanted to try the same thing. So we are going to talk about one of my favorite subjects in coaching the high jump, which is power versus speed. If you have been around long enough and been involved in maybe you as a jumper, or maybe one of your sons or daughters is a high jumper, and you didn't know anything about it before, if you didn't have any experience with it, you might start hearing certain people talk and they're going to say, hey, well, that guy's a power jumper, or, oh, she's a speed jumper, or whatever. It is a classification that comes up when you're talking about different jumpers, because it's very easy to spot very quickly when you're watching the high jump that not everybody is the same. Some people are very deliberate and slow and kind of get everything set together, and then they jump and they seem to jump great. They jump straight up off the ground. They do all kinds of great things. And others are really moving fast. And when they get to the bar, they may be doing some other thing. So at first glance, you may just think, oh, well, it's a difference in speed only. But there are some other things at play here. So first, I want to talk about power jumpers. Now, my experience with power jumpers is a long one, because that's basically where I would put myself. Being as I didn't really have any speed per se. If you were watching me athletically, once I got out of the 6th grade and grew up a lot, I got taller, longer legged. If I ever had any speed before, I think at 12, I was about 5 feet tall. So my legs weren't real long and I was actually pretty quick. And then when I shot up, I couldn't run anymore. It didn't seem like, but I could run. It just wasn't very fast. So, but I could always jump. That was one thing I always had from 4th grade up. So when I glommed onto the high jump, I would just kind of cruise up there and, kind of get everything set, and I could jump, and I'd go straight up in the air. And I had to learn a couple tricks, after that, as far as how to curl around the bar or whatnot. But power jumping was the way that I operated. Now, if you had asked me at that time, are you a power jumper? I would have had no idea. That didn't come up till later. So the first characteristic that I'm going to say for power jumpers is that almost invariably, and I welcome a different point of view, is that power jumpers tend to be double arm takeoff people. And that is strictly as a result of the fact that it is difficult to run fast while your arms are working together doing the same exact thing. If you're a sprinter, your arms are always opposing. Okay. One knee comes up and the opposite arm comes up, which is nice and balanced. And then you take your next step and you switch legs and arms. but it's always across you, right? And your arms are going in different directions. One's going forward, the other one's going back. So if you watch, the 100, the 200, the 400, any race of any kind, and from the time you were 1 year old, you learn how to swing your arms in opposition. Okay. They don't work together. You don't see people running going like this, both arms forward, both arms back is very awkward because it's not the pattern that we learned. And it's, I believe, a little bit slower. I think it clunks through your brain a little bit. Now, does that mean that power jumpers can't be fast? I would say a definite no to that. But I would also say that, does that mean that power jumpers are moving as fast as they could move? And at that point, I would have to say, I don't think so. I think you can run faster, normal arm swing. Okay. So what happens? Where does that different thing happen? So for a power jumper, they don't run like this, the whole way there. You have an approach, it depends. Barshim, I've seen Barshim run into a 7-step approach. I've seen at the far extreme, earlier in his career, Brandon Stark from Australia had a 16-step approach, which would have been, the way I count, 11 steps straight and then 5 on his curve for a grand total of 16, which is a long approach. And he does move fast. And we'll find out why here in a second, what the difference is. So power jumpers tend to be moving slower because they tend to get both arms ready when they jump. And that means they're going to use both arms for lift. They're going to use their drive knee. And one thing I will say is that both power versus speed, the knee drives tend to be really, really good. One element in particular, we'll talk about another time, the up and across. But, as a power jumper, once I get to my curve, if I'm running straight, my arms are opposed. I can drop into my curve and I can still have my arms opposing. But if I'm going to use both arms, like I've seen, and you've seen basketball players jump up with both arms to grab a rebound, or you've seen a volleyball player playing middle blocker and they jump up with both arms and they try to put them over the net and block your shot. And you will see some guys can jump up that way in basketball, grab the ball and dunk it, or use both arms jumping up with the ball already and take it with them and dunk it. Right. So I can use both arms for lift. It makes me taller. And so that is one thing and one way to jump. If you ever watch basketball, you've seen both of these styles come out, which is why I believe most coaches would like to, recruit their best players, their best athletes, their best people that don't know anything about a high jump would come straight out of basketball, because you can see those styles work their way out in people that play. Sometimes I've told athletes, say, hey, run up and go like you're going to lay the ball up. You're just doing a layup with this offhand. Well, if I'm teaching someone to do a layup, they're a single arm jumper. They're running up and just letting that arm go, and they might jump with the other arm. Whereas if somebody was jumping up, I say, hey, go up there and go like this. You're not going to be able to do that when you're doing a layup. Most people don't grab it with two hands. And one thing that I do know about grabbing it with two hands is that my reach is a little shorter with two as opposed to one. I can get a little bit higher. So as I'm running through, my arms are opposing, right? If I'm a double armor and I'm used to using both arms for lift, at some point I'm going to have to get ready to jump. And there's about 5 different styles that I've identified over the years. The one that I did was called the gather and jump. And I'd be running along, and with about 3 steps to go, I would go, oh, wait, you know how you guys are used to being apart? And my arms are going, yeah. And all of a sudden I go, well, I'm going to have one of you stop, and I'm going to have the other one swing up and join it. Boom. That wastes a step. Okay. And that's where I believe it's very easy to let your speed drop, because as soon as you start doing something different, your brain kind of goes, wait, what? And so I gather together my hands, and now they can swing back and swing back up together. And I can use them both with my knee drive for lift. Okay. So that's a gather and jump. Some people whip that arm back and let it hang back and join the other one to it. I call that the whip back double arm. Some people will do a little bunny hop in the pea patch, I call it. It is kind of a gather jump into another jump, and they get their arms together. So there's a lot of different ways to do it, but basically, what's the difference? Little drop in speed maybe, or maybe my top speed isn't as good as it would be. Both of those are possible. But what's the trade-off? I get both arms behind me and I drive them up. And that's a significant change in my center of mass with both my arms and my knee drive. I got 3 major changers of my center of mass, and they happen after my foot hits the ground. Okay, as my takeoff foot hits the ground, then they all start coming up. Okay, or they might have already started up, but basically they're all going to come together and finish up. So now, what is the difference between that? There are great, fantastic power jumpers all over the planet. Okay, and you say, which one's better, power versus speed? Well, I don't think anybody that is listening to this would say that Sotomayor from Cuba, who jumped 245, broke the world record, that he was a speed guy. I don't believe he was slow, but he was a very deliberate 2-arm gather, reach back, drive everything up. And he, having jumped against him in person and watching him in action shortly after he broke the world record, jumped 7.8 at UCLA, a meet that I was at, and he didn't miss. He went 7.2, 7.4, 7.6, 7.8, 4 of the best jumps I've ever seen. Well, they were the 4 best jumps I've ever seen, without a doubt. His 7.8 jump, he had about 6 inches of clearance on it, and he literally went straight up. I remember watching it going, wow. But his attack speed was not, that much. And he wasn't, as I remember, really far away from the bar at takeoff. Now, he was a power jumper, best one ever, right? World record holder. Somebody can answer this for me later. I think he might have won 1 Olympics. I'm not sure. You'd think he'd have to have won at least 1. I know Cuba boycotted a couple. If he didn't, I know that he won different, both indoor and outdoor world championships, and obviously world record holder. Barshim is, in my estimation, a very fast power jumper. He does use both arms at takeoff and use them to get excellent height width. He does, on the other hand, take off farther away from the bar, more like a speed jumper would. So at his extremes, you might get an argument, but I would still say that he's a power jumper that just happens to be faster than all the other ones. After that, at the world level, of the guys that I've seen over the last few years, and again, I don't know all of them, and I was out of the game for quite a while here, but I watch Bondarenko from the Ukraine, from the left side, pure speed. I mean, I can never tell where his approach starts. So he looks like he's jogging in, and then he starts running, and then he eventually drops in his curve, and he just runs off the ground. Single armor and pretty fast. For a guy that's 6'8", he doesn't look fast. Why? Because he's taking long strides and cycling like crazy, but he gets a ton of lift and then just kind of reaches for his heels a little bit and spins around and has great rotation. And that's what another thing I would say about most power jumpers, that I don't think they get as good a rotation because they do convert up better, but I don't think they spin as much simply because they weren't running as fast. But again, Barshim really blows that out of the water. I'm arguing both sides. But anyway, the power guys are a little bit slower. They hit vertical a little bit better, and there's all kinds of great ones. And by great, I mean world-class and legendary. Charles Austin. I don't think anybody would argue that Charles Austin was a power jumper who won the Olympics, has set the Olympic record at 7:10.5, coached by Sue Humphrey. And he was tremendous and not a slow athlete, but I just don't believe carrying as much speed or relying on that speed for lift. He was very strong, big gather, drive his arms back, drive his arms and his knee up like crazy. So the one thing you're going to see about a power jumper for sure is an outrageous knee drive. Okay, usually an outrageous knee drive. Then when it comes to layout styles, you're going to see usually a big, what I would call hip punch. As they go into layout, they generally will pull both hands back down, preferably to their hips, but not always. But they can't leave them out as a power jumper as the most part, because you're really not going to spin. So you're not going to get great rotation at the top. And especially if they convert straight up, and that's a little bit of a problem, they really need to tuck them back in pretty quickly. But that's, the power guys, slower, better arms, fantastic knee drives. and usually a pretty good hip punch after that. Because if you're good at driving your knee up, that knee is going to be way up above the other one, and you got to get them back together somehow. Okay. Some guys can sit in a chair and do it, but not at really great heights. Otherwise, you're going to have to figure out a way to level out, get your head going back, and get over. So what's the difference between that and speed? Just speed, yeah. How do those speed guys get both arms together? Well, guess what? They have trouble doing it, or they don't even bother. They're running so fast that they lean back, and that inside arm, as it comes up, just goes up, and then they just follow it out. Okay. So that lead arm doesn't stop and come back like Fosbury did. Fosbury's takeoff it's not unique because it's been copied since him. At the time it was, but he would reverse his arms like a long jumper would. Okay. He didn't double arm either. And his single arm was not what I call the European single arm, which is this arm swings up and then just continues on its own. And if there was an American that did that first and a European copied you, I apologize. My history isn't that good. I don't know. I haven't heard that. I've always called it the European single just because I see a lot of the Europeans do that, both men and women. So what are the advantages? Number one, I have more attack speed. The faster I'm moving, I believe I can get my limbs swinging in an upward direction quickly, easier because they're already moving fast, as long as I don't slow down. Okay. So if I can accelerate up off the ground, great. What is a big advantage of the person who is the single armor putting that single arm up? Well, if you put your arm up over your head, you are now taller in a completely biomechanical sense. If I raise my arm up above my head, I have just become a taller entity with a higher center of mass, and I have not left the ground yet when I'm compared to another person, compared to myself. Okay. I'm 6'3", 195 pounds, just like I was in college. I'm now 59 years old instead of 22 years old. So when college, I would gather and jump and drive both arms up, right? So when I went to take off, I was 6'3", and since I was leaning to my left and taking a pretty big step, I was probably a little bit shorter than 6'3". So my center mass would be down compared to a taller, older, slower version of me, but that one with his arm up above his head, I'd probably have a higher center of mass. And I actually enjoy jumping now with my athletes by getting that lead arm up and getting off the ground. I don't jump anywhere near like what I used to, but I find it easier. So what is the advantage? Number one, faster. Okay. Number two, I am technically taller center of mass as I go to jump. Okay. What's a disadvantage? I believe I'm going to have trouble creating as much lift from a straight power jump. However, what is another big difference between speed and power? Power jumpers don't run as great of curves in relation to the faster guys. Now, if you're a faster power guy, you're probably going to generate more lift out of your curve than somebody else. This was made evident to me when I watched for the first time. I was a kid in college, 1984. I was a sophomore at UCLA, and I saw Doug Nordquist on TV, and I saw him jump and make the team. And then I saw a couple weeks, or months, however long the switch is, to go from the U.S. trials to the Olympics. And I saw him jump in the Olympics, and he jumped 7.6 and came in 5th, right? And which was a great performance. But you don't really get it, especially back then. TV has gotten better now, but they still are always picking bad angles. And it's really different when you're down on ground level. When Doug Nordquist, who was 6'5", and correct me if I'm wrong, Dougie Doug, but if he was any more than 165 pounds, I'd have been stunned. I think he was probably a little less. Very tall, very thin, very fast. And he ran an unbelievable curve where he would be leaning at least a 30-degree incline to his left. And I suspect it may have even gotten to be more. Doug eventually jumped, 236. That's his handle on Instagram. Shameless plug for Doug Nordquist at Bounder236 on Instagram. That's 7'8" 3/4 for those of you that don't know your metric at home. And he would get a tremendous catapult out of the lean itself. Okay. Leaning away from the bar at high speeds causes your body to whip up. Okay. Depending on how you execute a bunch of other things, but that can add to somebody's already great leaping ability. So that's another thing I think is an advantage for the speed guys. And like I said, on the world scene right now, I tend to see more speed guys in the higher reaches. Um, Again, maybe that's just me. Okay. Maybe that's just me. I don't watch all of them all the time. I'm busy training my clients. I work with a lot of younger athletes and high school kids, and I have a couple of college types and a couple of elites, but I'm not working with everybody, and I can't say comprehensively what it is. I'm just telling you the trends that I see when I'm watching. So, what are the great single armors doing? Well, Bondarenko has jumped 243, 7.5, same as Barshim. Okay. 2 centimeters short of the world record. I do know that Barshim has jumped 243 more than Sotomayor himself did, meaning more times, and had some really impressive clearances where you would think, my God, that guy could jump 8.3 or something, but he is topped out there. Bondarenko, 7.11.5. Stefan Holm, another at 5.11.5, jumps 7.11.5, also 243. There are many other 7.11 jumpers out there. I believe Sjöberg jumped 7.11 also at one point, from Sweden, another single armor, very fast, very tall, very light. So again, sometimes you'll see body differences in there also. Someone who's faster, taller, lighter, single arm, boom. Like I said, Barshim to me is an aberration for that. He looks like, when you watch him approach, you're thinking, oh yeah, single armor. He's so fast and so skinny and so, explosively quick through the takeoff. He's a mile away from the bar when he takes off, but he really gets a slingshot and hits vertical, and so kind of a crossover. Definitely. He's got traits. I keep thinking he should have jumped 8.3 or 4 by now. Technically one of the best when he's on that I've ever seen. But looking down the list of jumpers, Hollis Conway from the US, and I believe Hollis jumped 7.10.5. I would qualify him as a power guy, even though he was like 6'1", 6 feet, 6'1". I know I was taller than Hollis. I only got to jump against him once. I'm sure he would not remember me. It was 1986 at the NC2A finals. But that was the only time I went. I'm sure he probably went 3 or 4 times. And but he was smaller, 6'1". That's not small. That's like watching the NBA and thinking the guards are small because they're 6'4" or 6'5" compared to the big 6'10" guys. But anyway, Hollis 6'1", maybe 150, I'm guessing. I don't think he was super heavy, fast and light, but he did use both arms. So as we're having this discussion, you're probably guessing that there's a lot of variance, which is true. I tell all my jumpers, I go, there are trends, there are things that work, but sometimes as soon as you say, I've made this mistake many times, as soon as you say there's only one way to do this, or I think I've got it all figured out and there's maybe 5 ways to do this, somebody's going to come along and break all the rules and be a completely different one where you go, hey, this guy seems to he does a gather. Like, here's an example. Derek Drown from Canada, who won in 2016, tall, 6'5", fast. Okay. But he looks like a power bounder start, just like Sotomayor. His first 4 steps are like, boom, like triple jump, long boundy strides, boom, boom, boom. And then all of a sudden he drops into his curve the same way that Sotomayor did, but they're from opposite sides. And he comes around and all of a sudden you see this big gather. I'm like, aha, here we go. Sotomayor from the left. But no, right then he takes a shorter swing back with his left arm and extends it up. And he's I would say single armor. But, you might get arguments. That's okay. We can have arguments. I'm happy to have a talk. But, to me, that crossed boundaries, because I would be like, why bother to gather? Why bother to bring your arms together if you're just going to swing one of them up on its own? But he was so tremendously fast, great rotation, up and over, and beat both both the best single armor in the world at that time, probably Bondarenko and Barshim back in 2016, both of whom I think were coming off injuries. But, Drown took it to him, both. I don't think he missed until it was over. So tremendous. The speed of the single armor. Do they always end up being tall and skinny? My first impression when I was in college, I used to be like, look at these guys. They're just tall, skinny sticks, and, I'm sure it's an ego game trying to psych myself up. I was never in that class, couldn't jump. 222 is okay, but these guys can jump that in warm up. They can open at that. So, jumping against someone like Mogenberg from West Germany, who won the gold in '84, jumped 7'8" 3/4. There's your 236 again, right? When you see him, you go, my estimation was he's just tall. He was 6'8", and he'd get that single arm up there. And, the disadvantage was film was so bad back then. Now you can really break stuff down on film, I think, better. Digital cameras, better views, more knowledge, all those kinds of things. I get to see a lot more jumping now than I ever did when I was competing. Unless you saw somebody in person. I mean, I can't find any video of anybody from back then. It's so difficult. Doug Nordquist has been very gracious and sent me some of his videos. I don't even have any of me, old video. And if I did, it would be grainy and, it's pretty terrible. So now you've got all these great cameras and you can see angles and there's all kinds of software where you can analyze things. It's fantastic. So I lost track of where I was. Power versus speed, great guys of the past. Where are we now? What works, what doesn't work. If I've got somebody who's taller and lighter, yeah. Oh, I remember I was talking about always tall and skinny. Not always, not always. Stefan Holm from Sweden, was 5'11" and a half and jumped, or 5'11" and a half, jumped 7'11" and a half. So, he jumped 2 feet over his head. He might have jumped, I don't know my metric. I apologize again. 243, I know it's 7'11" and a half. Maybe he jumped 242 and it's 7'11". And he was 5'11", but he was either 5'11", jumped 7'11", or 5'11" and a half, jumped 7'11" and a half, because he and the American Franklin Jacobs, who was 5'7", or 5'6" and a half, or 5'7", and jumped 7'7". So they hold the record, the two of them, for jumping the highest over their own heads, which is 2 feet, which is a lot. But anyway, again, Stefan Holm was a single arm. So, who's to say? Great knee drive. Fantastic. All right. So I'm going to wrap it up. Our first ever rant. I'm going to call it my rant on power versus speed. What was the conclusion? Which one's better? It's kind of a toss up. If you go straight results as far as the world record's concerned, I don't think anybody would argue against the fact that that Sotomayor was a power jumper. As far as which one is best, right after him, in my estimation, as possibly the greatest, second greatest, and borderline right up there, having won now his gold medal, and having jumped 7'11" and a half more times than anybody else, Barshim, another what I would call power jumper. Now, some may argue speed takes off farther away from the bar, but he definitely gathers and gets both arms back and brings them up. So you've got those guys, and then Charles Austin, okay, the American record holder. So the world record holder, Sotomayor, the American record holder, Charles Austin, and that other R, there's the WR, world record, there's the AR, American record, there's the OR, the Olympic record is also Charles Austin. So you could make a very strong case that power jumpers are ruling. But right now, I would argue that there's more speed guys. And I see the future of the high jump going to more speed. Or if you could train them and get somebody that really understands the dynamics of not only how to get your arms ready and power up at slower speeds, but can actually go faster and be farther out, and also get some of the catapult that comes from running a good curve, a la Barshim, right? Then maybe you can get someone to challenge those guys who's not Barshim and jump over 8 feet. Haven't seen anybody do that yet, though, even amongst all those those single armors, the tall, skinny ones. You know, and there's a ton of them out there. I love watching Brandon Stark. Brandon, if you ever happen to listen to my podcast, I'm a big fan of your work. I appreciate the fact that you show everybody all your training that you're doing. Not all, I'm sure he's got some secrets, but he does show a lot of his lifting and bounding exercises, and I've stolen liberally from him as I'm trying to train my single armor. So appreciate you and your work. Bondarenko, great single armor. Drown, put him in that category. His career was short, you know, too short on the world scene, I think, but did some amazing work, obviously walking away with a gold medal in 2016. So take a look for yourself. You know, you agree, you disagree. I'm happy to argue with you or have you on a podcast and we'll argue. But if you're listening right now on YouTube, please hit subscribe to the Sky High and Fly Jump Camps channel. I'm also on Instagram at Sky High and Fly Jump Camps. Again, my name is Troy Haynes, and this was Raise the Bar. This is the first Haynes rant, let's call it, and it was power versus speed. Until next time, Troy Haynes here signing off from Raise the Bar, and we'll be talking at you again real soon.